The purple crystals hummed with power as High Counselor Veltar raised his 6 arms toward the ancient temple ceiling. Around him, 12 other Zephyrians stood in a perfect circle, their silver robes flowing in the energy currents that filled the sacred chamber. The air crackled with electricity, and the smell of ozone filled their breathing slits. "Are you certain this is our only choice?" asked Counselor Moran, her voice trembling with fear and doubt. The younger Zephyrian had never seen the Forbiddance. Ritual performed before, none of them had. The knowledge was too dangerous, too unpredictable. Veltar's large black eyes reflected the crystal's glow as he nodded slowly. "The Vorthik have destroyed 17 of our worlds in the past cycle. Their ships block out our suns. Their weapons turn our cities to ash. We have tried diplomacy, tried surrender, tried hiding. Nothing works. They consume everything in their path." Through the temple's transparent walls, they could see the night sky filled with burning streaks of light. More Zephyrian ships were falling to the surface, their crews dead or captured. The Vorthik Empire had found their homeworld at last. "The ancient texts speak of heroes from distant stars," Veltar continued, his voice growing stronger. "Warriors of great courage and skill who have faced impossible odds and won. If we can summon them here, perhaps they can teach us to fight back." The other Zephyrians exchanged worried glances. Fighting was not their way. For 3,000 years, their species had lived in peace. They grew food, created art, and studied the stars. Violence was something from their dark past, something they had moved beyond. "Begin the ritual," Veltar commanded. The Zephyrians began to chant in their ancient tongue, their voices rising and falling in harmony. The crystals responded, glowing brighter with each word. Energy flowed between them, creating patterns of light that danced across the temple walls, far across the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching the Pacific Fleet conduct training exercises. The massive aircraft carrier cut through the blue waters while fighter jets roared overhead. Around them, destroyers and submarines moved in perfect formation. "Beautiful day for war games," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Rodriguez, adjusting her communications headset. "The weather is perfect, and all systems are running smooth." Morrison nodded, his weathered face showing the years of service at sea. "Make sure all ships stay in formation. We're testing the new tracking systems today, and I want everything by the book." On the flight deck below, pilots prepared their aircraft while deck crews ran through safety checks. The sound of jet engines mixed with shouted orders and the crash of waves against the hull. It was controlled chaos, the kind that only came from years of training and discipline. Chief Engineer Danny Sullivan emerged from below decks, wiping grease from his hands. "Engine room reports all systems green, Captain. We're ready for whatever you throw at us." Morrison smiled. His crew had been together for 2 years, and they worked like a well-oiled machine. The Defiant was the newest ship in the fleet, equipped with the latest technology and crewed by some of the Navy's best. "Sir, I'm picking up some strange readings on the sensors," reported Ensign Bobby Chun from his station. "It looks like some kind of energy disturbance, but it's not showing up on any of our databases." Before Morrison could respond, the sky above the fleet began to shimmer like heat waves on hot asphalt. The air itself seemed to bend and twist, creating a spiral of colors that hurt to look at directly. "What in the hell is that?" Morrison demanded, grabbing the ship's intercom. "All hands, this is the captain. We have an unknown phenomenon above the fleet. All aircraft return to base immediately." The spiral grew larger, pulling at the ships below with an invisible force. Electronics began to malfunction as the energy field expanded. Radio communications filled with static and compass needles spun wildly. "Captain, we're losing control of the engines," Sullivan shouted over the growing noise. "Whatever that thing is, it's messing with our power systems." The Defiant groaned as the mysterious force lifted it from the water. Around them, other ships in the fleet were also rising, trapped in the same energy field. Sailors grabbed onto anything solid as gravity seemed to shift and change. "All hands, brace for impact," Morrison ordered, but he had no idea what they were about to impact with. The world exploded into light and sound as the ships were pulled through the portal. Stars streaked past the windows like silver threads, and the sensation of falling filled every person on board. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Morrison found himself standing in what looked like a crystal temple, surrounded by tall purple beings with too many arms. His officers materialized around him, looking dazed and confused. Through the temple walls, he could see the USS Defiant and several other ships from the fleet floating in the air above an alien landscape. "Welcome, heroes from the stars," said Veltar, his voice somehow speaking perfect English despite his alien appearance. "We have summoned you to save our world from destruction." Morrison looked around at his crew, then at the strange aliens, then at his ship hanging in the sky outside. He had been in the Navy for 20 years, had seen combat in 3 different wars, and had commanded vessels through hurricanes and enemy fire, but nothing had prepared him for this. "Well," he said. Finally, his voice calm despite the impossible situation, "this is definitely not in the training manual." Rodriguez stepped forward, her hand moving instinctively to her sidearm. "Captain, should we consider these beings hostile?" The Zephyrians backed away at the gesture, their large eyes widening with fear. They had expected noble warriors, perhaps? Beings of light and wisdom. Instead, they had summoned creatures whose first instinct was to reach for weapons. "No sudden movements," Morrison ordered his crew. "We need to figure out what's happening here before we do anything else." Veltar approached slowly, his arms raised in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. "Please, we mean you no harm. We summoned you because we need your help. The Vorthic Empire seeks to destroy all life in our sector of the galaxy. We have no warriors, no weapons, no way to defend ourselves." Morrison studied the alien leader, noting the fear in his voice and the way the others cowered behind him. These were not conquerors or threats. They were refugees, desperate people who had tried something beyond their understanding. "How many ships did you pull through?" Morrison asked. "Ships?" Veltar looked confused. "We summoned only heroes. We did not expect to bring your doticles." Through the temple walls, Morrison could see more of his fleet appearing in the alien sky. Destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels all hung in the air like toys in a child's mobile. Thousands of his fellow sailors were probably as confused as he was. "Sir," Chun reported, checking his portable scanner, "I'm reading atmosphere and gravity similar to Earth. The air is breathable, but the radiation levels are slightly higher than normal." Morrison nodded, his mind already working through the implications. They were stranded on an alien world with no way home, surrounded by beings who seemed to have the technology to move entire fleets across space, but no idea how to use it for warfare. "All right," he said, turning to address both his crew and the aliens. "Let's start with introductions. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, United States Navy. These are my officers. And you are?" "I am High Counselor Veltar of the Zephyrian Council." The alien replied, bowing slightly. "We have made a terrible mistake. We sought to summon heroes, but instead we have brought warriors from a death world." "Death world?" Rodriguez asked, raising an eyebrow. "Your planet," Veltar explained, his voice filled with horror. "Our scans show it as a world of constant violence and danger. Extreme weather, predatory creatures, toxic environments. Only the most aggressive and adaptable species could survive there." Morrison almost smiled. Earth certainly had its challenges, but he had never thought of it as a death world. To these peaceful aliens, however, humanity's home must seem like a nightmare. "Well," he said, "I guess that makes us exactly what you need." The morning sun cast long shadows across the Zephyrian capital as Captain Morrison and his senior staff walked through the crystal streets. Their heavy boots echoed strangely on the smooth surfaces, a harsh sound that made the local aliens flinch and move away. The Zephyrians glided rather than walked, their movements flowing like water. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered Major Pete Williams, the Marine commander who had been aboard the Defiant during the exercises. "Too quiet, too clean. Where are the defenses? The guard post, the weapons?" Ambassador Crendo, their assigned guide, overheard the comment. His purple skin darkened with what Morrison had learned was embarrassment. "We have no need for such things, Major Williams. Our society evolved beyond violence long ago. We solve conflicts through meditation and discussion." Rodriguez adjusted her communication device, still trying to establish contact with the rest of the fleet. "Captain, I'm getting reports from the other ships. Everyone's accounted for, but the crews are getting restless. They want to know what's happening." "Tell them to maintain position and await orders," Morrison replied. "We need to understand the situation before we make any moves." They entered a large building that seemed to be grown rather than built, its walls curving in impossible ways. Inside, holographic displays showed star maps and what appeared to be battle reports. The images were difficult to watch, showing Zephyrion. Cities being destroyed by dark ships that moved like hungry predators. "This is our current situation," Veltar explained, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The Vorthic Empire has consumed 43 worlds in the past year. They take everything useful and leave nothing but dead rock behind." Dr. Amy Carter, the fleet's chief medical officer, studied the recordings with professional interest. "What exactly are these Vorthek? What do they want?" "Resources," replied Counselor Moran, who had joined them for the briefing. "They strip mine entire planets, take all the metals and energy sources, then move on. But they also seem to enjoy the fear and suffering they cause. They make examples of worlds that resist." Morrison watched the footage of a Vorthik attack. The enemy ships were massive, black vessels that looked like giant insects. They fired energy weapons that turned buildings to glass and people to ash. But what struck him most was the lack of organization in their assault. "They're sloppy," he said, surprising the Zephyrians. "No formation flying, no coordinated attacks. They just rely on overwhelming firepower and fear." Major Williams nodded in agreement. "Classic bully tactics. They've never fought anyone who hit back." "Hit back?" Crendo looked confused. "But violence only leads to more violence. Surely there must be a peaceful solution." "Not with these guys," said Chief Engineer Danny Sullivan, who had been quietly studying the technical readouts. "Look at this data. They've been expanding for decades, destroying everything in their path. They're not interested in negotiation." The Zephyrians exchanged worried glances. These humans spoke of violence so casually as if it were just another tool to be used. To the peaceful aliens, such thinking was both fascinating and terrifying. "Perhaps you could teach us to hide better," suggested Veltar hopefully, "or help us develop better shields for our cities." "Hiding won't work forever," Morrison said bluntly. "And shields are just a temporary solution. If you want to survive, you need to fight back." The word "fight" made several Zephyrians step backward. Their large eyes grew even wider with fear. "We cannot," Moran whispered. "We are not built for such things. Our bodies are fragile, our minds focused on harmony and peace. We would not know how to begin." Dr. Carter had been examining the medical data about Zephyrian physiology. "They're right, Captain. Their bone structure is much lighter than ours. Their muscle mass is minimal. They're adapted for a low-gravity world with no natural predators." "What about their technology?" Rodriguez asked. "The summoning ritual was incredibly advanced. Surely they have other capabilities." "Our technology is focused on creation and healing," Crendo explained. "We can grow buildings, purify water, heal diseases. But we have no knowledge of weapons or warfare." Sullivan shook his head in disbelief. "You can move entire fleets across space, but you never thought to weaponize that technology?" "Why would we?" Veltar seemed genuinely puzzled. "Violence is the enemy of progress. We believe that all intelligent species would eventually reach the same conclusion." Morrison was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. These aliens had created a utopia, but they had also made themselves completely defenseless. When a species like the Vorthik came along, they had no answer except to hide or run. "Tell me about the other species in the galaxy," he said. "Are they all like you?" "Most civilizations follow the path of harmony," Moran replied. A few younger species still practice warfare, but they are considered primitive and are avoided by the galactic community. So when the Vorthak showed up, nobody fought back? Some tried, Krendo admitted sadly. The Altari had a small defense force, but they were destroyed in a single battle. The Centrans attempted to negotiate, but the Vorthak used the peace talks to position their ships for a surprise attack. Williams was studying the tactical displays with growing excitement. Captain, this is incredible. The Vorthak have been fighting defenseless civilians for decades. They have no idea how to handle real military opposition. What do you mean? Veltar asked. They're used to overwhelming scared civilians, Morrison explained. Their tactics are designed to create panic and quick surrender. They've never faced an enemy that shoots back. The Zephyrians looked at each other with dawning horror. They had summoned these humans hoping for wise protectors, but instead they had brought creatures who seemed to think violence was the solution to every problem. You must understand, Dr. Carter said gently, noticing their distress. Humans come from a world where we had to fight to survive. We had predators, natural disasters, diseases, and yes, wars between our own people. It made us hard, but it also made us strong. Your world created you to be warriors, Valtar said slowly, as if the concept was difficult to grasp. Not just warriors, Morrison corrected, survivors. We adapt, we overcome, we protect what matters to us. And right now, you matter to us. Rodriguez's communication device crackled to life. Captain, we're picking up long-range signals. Multiple ships approaching the system at high speed. The energy signatures match the Vorthak vessels in the database. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. This was what he had trained for his entire career. How long until they arrive? Approximately 6 hours at current speed. The Zephyrians began to panic, their harmonious voices rising in distress. But Morrison remained calm, his mind already working through the possibilities. 6 hours, he said to his officers. That's enough time to prepare a welcome they won't expect. What do you mean? Veltar asked, his voice trembling. Morrison smiled. Grimly. The Vorthak are about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with a species that actually knows how to fight back. Williams was already thinking tactically. We'll need to coordinate with the other ships, set up defensive positions around the planet, maybe lay some traps. And we'll need to understand their technology better, Sullivan added. Know your enemy's capabilities? The Zephyrians watched in amazement as the humans transformed from confused visitors into a military unit preparing for battle. Their movements became sharper, their voices more focused. It was like watching predators preparing to hunt. Is this what you are truly like? Krendo asked in wonder. When faced with danger, you become ... different? We become what we need to be, Morrison replied. And right now, we need to be the thing that stands between you and extinction. As the humans began to plan their defense, the Zephyrians started to understand that their desperate summoning ritual might have brought them exactly what they needed after all. Not the peaceful heroes they had expected, but something far more dangerous and far more effective. The Deathworld had sent its children to war. The USS Defiant buzzed with activity as Captain Morrison stood in the command center, watching his crew prepare for battle. Around him, officers moved with practiced efficiency, their voices calm despite the approaching threat. The ship's weapons systems hummed to life for the first time since arriving in alien space. Report from the other vessels, Rodriguez called out, her fingers dancing across the communication console. All ships are ready for combat. The destroyers are taking positions around the planet's orbital approach routes. Morrison nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the positions of his fleet. 27 ships in total, from the massive carrier to the smallest support vessel. Not a large force by Earth standards, but they had advantages the Vorthak had never faced before. Commander Tom Bradley entered the bridge, his face grim but determined. Captain, we've completed our reconnaissance of the Vorthak technology. Their ships are powerful, but they have some serious weaknesses. Show me, Morrison said, pulling up the holographic display. Bradley pointed to the enemy ship designs. Their hulls are thick but brittle. They rely on energy shields that are calibrated to deflect other energy weapons. Our kinetic weapons should punch right through them. And their tactics? Asked Major Williams, who had joined them from the Marine preparation area. Predictable, Bradley replied. They come in fast, fire everything they have, and wait for surrender. They don't expect return fire, so they don't use evasive maneuvers. On the planet's surface, Lieutenant Alex Murphy worked with a team of Zephyrians to set up defensive positions around the capital city. The aliens watched in amazement as the humans turned their peaceful gardens into military strongholds. Why? Do you dig holes in the ground? Asked a young Zephyrian named Tolmer, watching Murphy's men create trenches and foxholes. Cover and concealment, Murphy explained, wiping sweat from his forehead. When someone shoots at you, you want something solid between you and them. Your crystal buildings are pretty, but they won't stop energy blasts. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it. The humans moved with purpose, turning every elevation into a firing position and every building into a fortress. They seemed to see the battlefield in ways the aliens couldn't understand. Dr. Carter worked frantically in the medical bay, preparing for casualties. She had studied the Vorthak weapons data and knew their energy weapons would cause burns and radiation poisoning. Her medical supplies were limited, but she had learned to improvise during her years in the service. Doctor, the Zephyrians have medical technology we've never seen, reported Corpsman Billy Taylor, examining the alien healing devices. These regeneration chambers can heal wounds in minutes. Good, Carter replied, not looking up from her preparations. We're going to need every advantage we can get. In the engineering section, Chief Sullivan studied captured Vorthak technology with the intensity of a man possessed. The alien devices were advanced but designed for intimidation rather than efficiency. Their power systems were overpowered but wasteful, their weapons impressive but inaccurate. It's like they designed everything to look scary rather than work. Well, he muttered to his assistant, Petty Officer Gary Smith, all show, no substance. Can we use that against them? Smith asked. Sullivan smiled grimly. Oh, we definitely can. Back on the surface, the Zephyrians gathered in their council chambers, watching the humans prepare for war with a mixture of fear and fascination. They had never seen such organized violence, such casual acceptance of danger. They move like they have done this many times before, observed Counselor Moran, watching the tactical displays. Because they have, Veltar replied sadly. We have summoned a species that has been fighting since the beginning of their existence. They know nothing else. Ambassador Crendo disagreed. That is not true. I have watched them work. They fight to protect, not to destroy. They have honor. Through the temple windows, they could see human soldiers teaching Zephyrian civilians how to take cover, how to stay low, how to survive. The humans were patient teachers, showing the aliens things that came naturally to any species from a dangerous world. Incoming transmission from the Vorthak fleet, Rodriguez announced from the Defiance Bridge. They're demanding immediate surrender. Morrison straightened his uniform and nodded. Put them on screen. The holographic display showed the bridge of a Vorthak command ship. The aliens were massive, muscular creatures with thick armor and cruel eyes. Their leader, a scarred warrior named Kreltak, sneered at the camera. I am War Commander Kreltak. Of the Vorthak Empire, the alien growled. You will surrender your ships and prepare for harvesting. Resistance will result in your painful death. Morrison stepped forward, his expression calm and professional. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United States Navy. You are ordered to leave this system immediately. Kreltak laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. You dare to give orders to the Vorthak? We have destroyed 1,000 worlds. Your pathetic ships cannot stand against our might. We'll see about that, Morrison replied quietly. The transmission ended, and the Vorthak fleet began to accelerate toward the planet. Their ships moved in a loose formation, confident in their overwhelming numbers and firepower. They're not even trying to be tactical, observed Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. They're just coming straight at us. Why would they? Williams asked. They've never faced real opposition before. They think this will be like every other conquest. Morrison. turned to his crew, all hands battle stations. This is what we trained for. Today we show these bullies what happens when they pick on the wrong species. Throughout the fleet, alarm bells rang as sailors ran to their positions. Weapons systems powered up, shields activated, and engines roared to life. The humans were ready for war in a way the peaceful galaxy had never seen. On the planet's surface, the Zephyrians huddled in their shelters, praying to their ancient gods for protection. They had lived in peace for so long that the concept of battle was almost beyond their understanding. But the humans understood battle. They had been born from a world that demanded strength, that punished weakness, that rewarded those who could adapt and overcome. The Vorthak were about to learn that Earth's children were not like the other species they had conquered. Enemy fleet and weapons range in 30 minutes, reported the tactical officer. Morrison nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching dots on the display. Signal all ships. Operation Deathworld is a go. The Zephyrians had summoned heroes to save their world. Instead, they had gotten something far more dangerous and far more effective. They had gotten warriors from a planet that had spent millions of years teaching its children how to survive impossible odds. The Vorthak Empire was about to face its first real battle in decades. And they had no idea what they were walking into. As the enemy ships closed in, the humans made their final preparations. They checked their weapons, said their prayers, and prepared to do what they had always done. They prepared to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The battle for Zephyr was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The first Vorthak ships appeared on the edge of the Zephyrian system like dark clouds bringing a storm. Their massive hulls gleamed black against the stars, energy weapons glowing with deadly promise. War Commander Kreltok stood on his bridge, watching the small human fleet through his tactical display. Pathetic, he growled to his second-in-command. 27 ships against our 300. This will be over before it begins. But Captain Morrison had no intention of fighting a traditional battle. His ships were spread across the system in positions that looked random but were carefully planned. The Vorthak were walking into a trap. Enemy fleet entering weapons range, reported the tactical officer aboard the USS Defiant. And they're maintaining formation, coming straight at us. Morrison smiled grimly. Just like Bradley predicted. They don't know how to fight a real military force. The Vorthak ships opened fire first, their energy weapons lighting up space with brilliant beams of destruction. The blasts were powerful. Enough to destroy a city, but they were aimed at where the human ships had been, not where they were going. Evasive maneuvers, Morrison ordered calmly. All ships, execute Plan Alpha. The human fleet scattered like a school of fish, their movements coordinated and precise. The Vorthak had expected them to stand and fight, to die with honor like the other species they had conquered. Instead, the humans did something the Vorthak had never seen before. They fought smart. What are they doing? Kreltok demanded, watching. The human ships dart between his vessels like angry wasps. Why do they not face us directly? His tactical officer looked confused. Sir, they appear to be using hit-and-run tactics. They fire, then move before we can target them. The human destroyers struck first, their railguns firing solid metal projectiles at incredible speed. The Vorthak energy shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, were useless against kinetic rounds. The projectiles punched through ship hulls like bullets through paper. Impossible! Kreltok roared as 3 of his ships exploded in brilliant fireballs. How can their primitive weapons penetrate our shields? On the planet's surface, the Zephyrians watched the battle through their viewing screens, unable to believe what they were seeing. The humans were outnumbered 15-1, yet they were winning. How are they doing this? Asked Counselor Murrin, her voice filled with awe. They fight like their world taught them, replied Valtar, beginning to understand. They do not stand and face the storm, they become the storm. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez coordinated the fleet's movements from the Defiance Bridge, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Bravo Squadron, target their command ship. Charlie Squadron, hit their engines, Delta Squadron, protect the carrier. The human ships moved with deadly purpose, each one playing its part in a complex dance of destruction. They used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around obstacles. They hid behind asteroids to avoid return fire. They worked together like a single organism with one goal. Commander Bradley led a strike force of fighters from the Defiant, his pilots weaving between the massive Vorthok vessels with skill that bordered on insane. The enemy ships were so large they couldn't target the small human aircraft effectively. "This is like flying through a forest of giants," Bradley reported over the radio. "They're too big to hit us, but we can sting them to death." The Vorthok tried to adapt, but they had never faced an enemy that fought back with such coordination. Their ships were designed for intimidation, not maneuverability. Their tactics were built around overwhelming force, not strategy. "Sir, we're losing ships faster than we can count," reported Kreltak as tactical officer. "The humans are targeting our weak points with surgical precision." On the ground, Major Williams watched the battle through binoculars while preparing his Marines for a possible surface assault. The Zephyrians had gathered around him, amazed by his calm demeanor. "Are you not afraid?" asked young Tolmer, his voice shaking with terror. Williams smiled. "Of course I'm afraid. Fear keeps you alive. But I'm more afraid of what happens if we lose." The turning point came when Chief Sullivan's engineering team activated their secret weapon. Using captured Vorthok technology, they had created a computer virus that infected the enemy ship systems through their own communication networks. "Virus is active," Sullivan reported from the engine room. "Their ships are starting to malfunction." Throughout the Vorthok fleet, systems began to fail. Navigation computers crashed, weapon systems overloaded, and life support systems fluctuated. Wildly, the enemy ships found themselves blind and helpless in the middle of a battle. "What is happening?" Kreltak screamed as his own ship shuddered under the electronic assault. "Our systems are failing. The humans have infected our networks," his technical officer reported in terror. "They have turned our own technology against us." Dr. Carter worked frantically in the medical bay as wounded human sailors were brought in from the damaged ships. The Zephyrian healing technology was indeed miraculous, but she had to adapt it to human physiology. "Doctor, how are they doing this?" asked Corman Taylor, watching the regeneration chambers work their magic. "They're not just healers," Carter replied with admiration. "They're artists. They see the body as something to be perfected, not just repaired." The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Vorthok had brought overwhelming numbers, but the humans had brought something more valuable. They had brought experience, tactics, and the desperate cunning of a species that had survived by fighting. One by one, the Vorthok ships were destroyed or disabled. Those that tried to retreat found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had positioned themselves with perfect precision. The mighty fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was being torn apart by a force a fraction of its size. "This is impossible," Kreltak muttered, watching his fleet die around him. "How can beings from a primitive world defeat the Vorthok Empire?" Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication system, calm and professional. "Because we're not from a primitive world. We're from a world that taught us how to fight, and you just picked a fight with the wrong species." The final phase of the battle came when Kreltak decided to lead a desperate assault on the planet's surface. If he could not defeat the human fleet, he would at least destroy the world they were protecting. "Prepare the landing ships," he ordered. "We will take this world by force." But the humans were ready for him. Lieutenant Murphy had turned the Zephyrian capital into a fortress, and his Marines were eager to show the aliens what ground combat looked like when fought by professionals. "Let them come," Williams said grimly, watching the Vorthok landing ships approach. "We'll teach them what happens when you invade a world protected by Earth's children." The Vorthok had brought their largest ships, their most powerful weapons, and their most experienced warriors. But they had never faced humans in battle before. They had never encountered a species that fought not just for victory, but for survival. As the landing ships touched down on Zephyrian soil, the final phase of the battle began. The Vorthak were about to learn that conquering a world defended by humans was very different from conquering a world defended by anyone else. The galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was about to change forever. The Vorthak landing ships crashed into the crystal gardens of the Zephyrian capital like meteors from space. Smoke and fire filled the air as War Commander Kreltok stepped onto alien soil, his massive frame covered in battle armor that had never known defeat. Behind him, 2,000 Vorthak warriors emerged from their ships, weapons ready for the slaughter they expected. "Burn everything," Kreltok commanded, his voice echoing through his helmet. "Show these soft creatures what happens when they defy the Vorthak Empire." But the expected screams of terror never came. Instead, the Vorthak found themselves in a city that seemed empty, its streets eerily quiet. The crystal buildings gleamed in the sunlight, but no panicked civilians ran through the streets. "Where are they?" asked Sub-Commander Grakemel, scanning the area with his weapon sensors. The readings showed millions of life forms in the city. Major Williams watched the aliens through his binoculars from a concealed position on a rooftop, 3 blocks away. Around him, his Marines waited in perfect silence, their weapons trained on the landing zone. The Zephyrians had been evacuated hours ago, leaving the city as an empty stage for the final act of the battle. "Let them spread out," Williams whispered into his radio. "Wait for my signal." The Vorthak moved through the streets like conquering heroes, their heavy boots shattering the delicate crystal pathways. They had done this on 100 worlds, burning and destroying everything in their path, but this world was different. This world had protectors who understood war. Lieutenant Murphy had positioned his men in the buildings around the main square, turning the beautiful architecture into a killing field. The Vorthak walked into the trap like animals heading to slaughter, their confidence making them careless. "Fire in the hole," Murphy whispered and pressed the detonator. The explosions came from everywhere at once. Buildings that had seemed empty erupted with gunfire and rocket blasts. The crystal structures that the Vorthak had ignored suddenly became deadly weapons as human-placed charges brought them crashing down on the invaders. "Ambush!" Kreltok roared, but his voice was lost in the chaos of battle. Half his warriors were down in the first 30 seconds, crushed by falling debris or cut down by precisely aimed gunfire. The Vorthak had fought many battles, but they had never fought humans. They were used to enemies who stood and fought with honor, who faced them directly and died with dignity. The humans had no interest in honor. They had interest in winning. "They're everywhere!" Grakemel screamed as bullets whistled past his head. "How are there so many of them? There weren't many humans at all." Williams had only 200 Marines against 2,000 Vorthak warriors. But the humans fought smart, using the environment and their superior tactics to multiply their effectiveness. From the rooftops, snipers picked off Vorthak officers with surgical precision. In the streets, Marines appeared from hidden positions, fired their weapons, then disappeared before the enemy could respond. The Vorthak found themselves fighting ghosts. "Stand and fight, cowards!" Kreltok bellowed, firing his energy weapon. "At shadows, face us like warriors." But the humans had learned long ago that there was no honor in a fair fight. There was only victory or death. And they had chosen victory. Dr. Carter worked frantically in the medical station that had been set up in the underground tunnels beneath the city. The Zephyrians had created a network of caves that connected their buildings, and the humans had turned them into a command center. "Casualties are light," she reported to Captain Morrison through the communication system. "The Marines are fighting smart, keeping their distance from the enemy." Morrison nodded, watching the battle through the tactical displays. The Vorthak were powerful, but they were also predictable. They charged straight ahead, relying on brute force and intimidation. Against civilians, such tactics were devastatingly effective. Against trained soldiers, they were suicide. "Sir, we're getting reports from across the galaxy," Rodriguez announced. "From the Defiance Bridge? Other species are watching this battle. They want to know how we're defeating the Vorthak." "Tell them later," Morrison replied. "First, we finish this." The battle in the city raged for 3 hours. The Vorthak tried every tactic they knew. but the humans always seemed to be one step ahead. When the aliens tried to regroup, snipers picked them off. When they tried to advance, hidden explosives destroyed their formations. When they tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked. Finally, Kreltok found himself alone in the central square, surrounded by the bodies of his warriors. The great commander who had conquered worlds stood in the ruins of his army. His armor cracked and his weapons empty. Major Williams emerged from the shadows, his rifle trained on the alien's chest. Around the square, other Marines appeared, their weapons ready. The Vorthek commander was trapped. "You fight without honor," Kreltok snarled, his voice filled with rage and defeat. "You hide like insects instead of facing us in battle. We fight to win," Williams replied calmly. "Honor doesn't help when you're dead. What are you?" Kreltok demanded. "What manner of creatures are you?" Williams smiled grimly. "We're humans. We're from a world that taught us how to survive. And you just learned why that matters." The news of the Vorthek defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had hidden in fear for decades suddenly found hope. The mighty empire that had seemed unstoppable had been broken by a small fleet from an unknown world. Within days, rebellions broke out on Vorthek-controlled worlds. The subject species had learned that their oppressors could be defeated, and they rose up with weapons and tactics taught by human advisors who had volunteered to help. Captain Morrison stood in the Zephyrian council chambers, watching the reports come in from across the galaxy. The peaceful species were learning to fight back, and the Vorthek Empire was crumbling. "We cannot thank you enough," Veltar said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have saved not just our world, but our entire civilization. You summoned." "US," Morrison replied. "We just did what we do best." "Will you stay?" asked Counselor Moran hopefully. "Will you help us build defenses against future threats?" Morrison looked out at the stars, thinking of Earth and the home they had left behind. The Zephyrians had offered to reverse the summoning ritual, to send them back to their own world. But the galaxy had changed, and Earth's children had found a new purpose. "Some of us will stay," he said finally. "We'll help you and others learn to protect yourselves. But we'll also find a way to contact Earth. Our people need to know what's out here." Dr. Carter had already begun working with Zephyrian scientists to develop new medical technologies. Chief Sullivan was teaching alien engineers how to build better defenses. The humans were adapting, as they always did. 3 months later, the first diplomatic mission from Earth arrived through a communication portal the combined human Zephyrian science teams had created. The galaxy watched in amazement as more ships from the Death World appeared, bringing teachers, doctors, engineers, and yes, more soldiers. The Terran Protectorate was born from the ashes of the Vorthek Empire, an alliance of species protected by human military might and guided by human wisdom. The galaxy had learned that sometimes, to preserve peace, you must be prepared for war. And in the depths of space, on worlds that had never known violence, children learned new games. Games about tactics and strategy, about courage and sacrifice, about standing up to bullies and protecting the innocent. The humans had come to the galaxy as accidental visitors, but they had become something more. They had become the guardians of peace, the protectors of the innocent, the sword and shield of a gentler universe. The Death World had sent its children to the stars, and the stars would never be the same.